Hi, welcome to Marquis Presents Your Key to Healthy Living. My name is Karen Halloran. I'm the community liaison, and I'll be your host today. Today, we have Representative Denise Garlick on the show. And thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and be on the show with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Fantastic. So I have a bunch of questions I wanted to ask you because I'm sure our viewers would love to know the answers of them. And the first thing is maybe we could start from basics. How did you get into politics?
So I'm going to answer that question, Karen, in two parts and share with you how much I appreciate this opportunity to be able to speak to people and share some of these viewpoints and some of my history about being in politics. The first thing I wanted to tell you is, of course, that I'm a registered nurse, and today is National Nurses Day, and being a nurse has been one of the gifts of my lifetime. I have an extraordinary husband and 4 adult children now who are the treasure of my life, but the gift has been to be a nurse, and I hope we'll talk about that a little bit, because it is the genesis of how I got into politics. So I was working in a hospital that had a nurses union. There were 10,000 employees. We were the only union in the hospital. There was a major indoor air quality problem. And I began my work on behalf of the nurses and all of the other employees in the hospital who needed a voice to speak for them on the issues of health and safety. And grew in that process, grew with our institution, who did tremendous work on indoor air quality, and learned a great deal about activism for nurses, organizing people, and ultimately became the president of the Mass Nurses Association, which is 23,000 nurses statewide, and was the only nurses association in the country that was focused on health and safety and had a health and safety department.
And, I was just wondering, how did that transfer into other politics?
So I think what happened, Karen, is I learned that that nurses were capable of being a voice for a large number of people. And I learned that I myself had skills that could translate into public policy. And I had been on Beacon Hill, and I had been advocating for the nurses and for our profession. And I came home to my hometown of Needham, and I ran for our Board of Health. And I served on our Board of Health, and we had 4 adolescents who died in an 18-month period. And my town, by suicide, and my town was rocked to its core. And because I was the chair of the board, and because I was a nurse, I believed that this was my shift and we had to do something. And the town of Needham formed the Coalition on Suicide Prevention that became a national model, and exists to this day. And then as I sat on that Board of Health and wanted to do things, I realized it was on the select board where the money was. So I ran for the select board so I could make ideas real policy. And then sitting there, I understood the strain on the town with the state, and that a lot of the strain could be alleviated through state policies. And so I ran for state representative.
Well, that is awesome. That's really wonderful, all of the different things that you've done. And I'm just wondering, what is your role in the House of Representatives this session?
So this session, I am the chair of bills in third reading. And this is a position within the House where any bill that goes to the floor, including the budget, comes through my committee. And no bill can go to the floor without the seal of House Counsel that is consistent with the Massachusetts Constitution and my signature. And I worked very hard to get to this position. As a nurse, I have served on all of the healthcare committees in the legislature. I was the chair of the Joint Committee on Elder Affairs and worked with all of the older adults in our commonwealth and many of our councils on aging, and certainly our nursing homes and those facilities. I was the chair of the Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use and Recovery, and I am the House author of the opioid bill of 2018, and then served as the vice chair of Ways and Means But this position, bills in third reading, I did have a constituent say to me, how many times do you have to read those bills, Denise? Right? But the chair of the bills in third reading, particularly during the COVID time in the legislature, we've been working remotely. It has been hard for me to not know everything that's happened. I am a bit of a nerd, I have to tell you. Mm-hmm. And in this position, I see every single bill and every single budget as it goes to the floor. And that was important to me. And it's also my opportunity. There are 160 state representatives. There's a little bit more than 6 million people in the Commonwealth. 160 state representatives, Democrats and Republicans, and I work with each and every one of them. There will be approximately 900 bills that will come through my committee in this session.
Wow. Well, it's very interesting to hear what's going on behind the scenes, really. Thank you so much for your hard work.
Thank you.
And another thing is, how has being a woman shaped your career in politics, including your legislative priorities?
So I think that's a great question. And I had an intern in my office from Simmons College. It's the Barbara Lee Fellowship Program. And I just met with her yesterday, and we were actually talking about this, what it means to be a woman in politics, what it means to be a woman in the legislature. And I said to her, what a learning curve it's been for me, because as a nurse, that is a woman-dominated field. As a nurse leader, I was leading many, many women and always felt the power and influence of that position of the president of the M&A. And then came to the state legislature, which, with great candor, I tell you, is a male-dominated institution, in both conscious and unconscious ways. And all the things I needed to learn about how to move in this world, how to be heard in this world. And I think the most important thing I would say, with great deference to my male colleagues, that to move in this world, a woman needs to work very, very hard. Nothing is given. All of it is earned. All of it is earned.
So I was just wondering what kinds of legislation you're focusing on this session that will impact women in the Commonwealth. Is there anything specific?
So there is, but I actually want to talk to you a little bit about my philosophy about this. And when I came to the legislature, there is a caucus in the legislature of women legislators. And I very much wanted to be part of that caucus and saw that would be my natural home. But one of the things I was concerned about is the caucus tended to focus on legislation that had to do with women's bodies, all of issues that I support. A woman's right to choose, access to contraceptives, all of that. But I actually have a broader philosophy about legislation that impacts women. And I think that we need to be women who focus on legislation that deals certainly with our family lives, but with our community lives, with careers, women's careers. And so I always think that what I bring is not my anatomy, right? What I bring is my perspective. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about wage equality is a woman's issue, right? We need to ensure that not only are genders compensated equally, but that we see that for different jobs, that there is advancement and an ability to move forward. I believe the Family Medical Leave Act, that's a woman's issue. When we look at the number of women now that are the heads of their households, that are holding down, so many women I know use their salary to pay for childcare and their job to pay for health insurance. And that's how they're moving forward. We have to support those issues. They're not just general issues, they are women's issues. And I think certainly some of the major legislation, I am the sponsor of a workplace violence bill, particularly in healthcare. Healthcare tends to be dominated by women workers. We know there is a dramatic increase in violence in the workplace, in healthcare. And part of it has been present, but it has also been exacerbated by COVID and the amount of mental health and behavioral health issues and the stress that the population in general is suffering, and the tension around a loved one with a virulent virus that we can't understand and being unable to be present with them. And we've seen a dramatic increase in workplace violence. So I'm the chief sponsor of that bill. That bill I sponsored on behalf of the nurses. That's a woman-dominated field, but it is not only for the nurses, it's for all of the healthcare employees. It's for everyone in their facility. I am one of the chief sponsors of a bill called the SAFE bill, and it's SAPHE, and that's a bill on local and regional public health. And it's the second iteration of a bill we passed last April. It's going to demand tremendous resources to be infused to strengthen our local public health. That's a woman's issue because we're talking about health. It is a general issue for the whole population, which we're talking about community strength. We're talking about protection of our families. So I like to think that what I am bringing is my perspective as a woman to the bills that I see that are impacting the population. And I don't ever marginalize women into, well, this is an issue that is narrowly defined. I think all of these issues impact women. Women are 51% of our population. What issue doesn't impact us?
Right. Well, on a different note, I was wondering, how do you think the legislature has responded to COVID-19?
So it's been interesting. I can answer that question in terms of the House of Representatives, and then I can, but I have to put a caveat on this. Massachusetts, since mid-March, has been under a state of emergency order. And under the state of emergency order, the governor has had tremendous powers and has exercised all of those powers. So at times I was asked, well, why doesn't the legislature do this? Or why isn't the legislature doing that? And it was because we didn't have that emergency power that the governor had. What we did do, though, and that I'm really very, very proud of, in the House of Representatives particularly, we had a COVID-19 team, and it was 5 members, and I was the lead on that team. We had, certainly I'm a nurse, we had the former chair of the Joint Committee on Public Health, the present chair of the Joint Committee on Public Health, newly elected representative who had 20 years experience in emergency management before coming to the legislature, and a very newly elected representative who's a physician and was working at Boston Medical, is still working at Boston Medical. And the charge that we were given was to hold the House of Representatives together, protect the integrity of the House of Representatives and the membership and the way we would communicate and work together, given a new and different way we were working remotely, working at that time, and to make sure that we were giving to those members the information they needed to serve their constituents in their districts and to develop ways in which we could do that. Massachusetts, through the House of Representatives, was the first legislature in the country who devised a system consistent with our Constitution, consistent with the law, that we could vote remotely and continue the work of the Massachusetts Legislature. And in fact, not only did we develop that system, but we moved ahead with legislation, and very meaningful legislation, through the end of last year. So we did that. But for me and for my colleagues, I think the legislature best served not in just broad policy ideas, but on the ground. We dealt with hundreds and hundreds of people on the issue of unemployment in my district, which is Needham, Dover, and Medfield. We dealt with the issues of food insecurity. We dealt with how we did more than 4 budgets in the last year as resources became available. And as you know, Karen, a tremendous amount of support in healthcare, not only for emergency supplies, but to support the infrastructure of healthcare itself, where in some circumstances, like emergency rooms and acute care, are under tremendous strain, and in other circumstances, like elective surgery and outpatient, not doing any business at all. And we held that system whole through that work. So I'm very proud. I have to tell you, I'm very proud of the ways the legislature functioned, even though it was not in familiar ways, maybe, to what the general population would consider, writing bills, passing bills, that kind of issue.
That's fantastic. So good to hear about all of those great things that you're doing. What resources would you recommend for seniors or other individuals who may be in need at this time? Because I know there's a need for a lot of things out there for seniors.
So there's so many great needs, Karen. And I think that, they say in every crisis, there's an opportunity. And I think the opportunity that we witnessed, and I hope we acted on and needs more action in the future, is our recognition of the older adults population, right? Mm-hmm. And when we talk about older adults, I think there's seniors, we have young seniors, we have middle-aged seniors, and we have elderly seniors. And each of those subgroups has specific needs that need to be addressed. But for all of them, we have learned that the food insecurity issue was huge. The transportation issue was huge. If we were trying to get older adults to doctor's appointments, if we were trying to get older adults to necessary and emergent medical issues, it was during the height of the COVID time, even their loved ones couldn't be in a car alone with them. How are we going to get people where they needed to go? And it really pointed out how isolating it could be. And there's always the issue related to housing. But I think one of the major issues that I have carried with me, I'm trying so hard to identify what did I learn, what was good, what could I take with me as we move into the future. It's around the need for connectedness, or certainly for everyone, but particularly for older adults. And we saw how quickly they could be isolated and how devastating that isolation could be. So even the things we witnessed in my own community around daily, check-ins on just how are you doing, and the incredible rise in the training and utilization of technology by older adults who they might not have ever been interested in getting a tablet, but they've got a tablet today and they're using it, and they're using it more effectively maybe than many of the younger adults in the town. And the need to have in our minds things that would alleviate the stress. I've engaged in lots of office visits virtually, in which people were just kind of sharing and just chatting, right? Like not everything has to be an issue. Not everything has to be polarized. Sometimes we can just chat with each other and check in and say, did you see this movie? I just read this book. What do you think of that? And I thought some of these things that seem basic were absolutely critical. And we need to continue to work on that and strengthen those connectedness with all older adults in our community.
That's great. Is there anything you'd like to add to our viewers? Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
So I think I would just like to say that thank you to any viewer who's watching. You're doing exactly what we were just talking about: staying connected, staying open, trying to listen to new voices, trying to learn new things. I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is, because through the last year, so many people were isolated, or so many people have just been talking virtually on Facebook or on other social media sources, talking to people that they know, people who maybe think about things the same way they do, that I'm worried we've lost our ability to be good listeners and to take in new information and be willing to change our minds on issues that might be in front of us. And I keep calling it the neighbor over the fence kind of talk, right? So when we talk to our neighbor over the fence, this might not be somebody who's our friend, but it's certainly someone we want to be friendly with, somebody we want to be on good terms with. So when you're leaning over the fence and talking about an issue, they might say something to you that you'll, in your head, you're like, huh, I didn't know that she thought that, or, oh, I wonder why he or she is saying that. But we don't then label that person. We then don't attack that person. We kind of wander back into our own house and we figure it out. Right now, we don't have that opportunity. So I think people's viewpoints are getting polarized. And I don't think that's a strength for us. I think that we're better when we're listening carefully to each other and that we're trying to learn from each other. And I had a dear friend who, when I first got elected, he said to me, don't talk about strengths and weaknesses, Denise. Talk about strengths and things to be strengthened. And so right now, I'm trying to do that in my personal life. After coming through this year, what did I find with my strengths? What do I think I need to strengthen? I'm trying to do it with my community. I'm certainly struggling to do it for my country, but I think it is the work ahead of us. I think that we have been through a terrible time that I'm hoping we're seeing the end of. I'm hoping that in a way, after dealing with this terrible, unpredictable virus, that we have seen in ourselves things that can be strengthened, and that down the road, we will be better for this terrible time we've gone through.
Well, I'd like to really thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and coming on the show today. It's much appreciated. I think this has been very informative for our viewers. I think they'll really enjoy hearing what you had to say. So I would just like to say Happy Nurses Day.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Karen. You take good care now.
Thank you. And until we see you next time, thanks for joining Marquis Presents Your Key to Healthy Living.